The president's in trouble. As Barack Obama marks 500 days in office, a new average of polls shows only 48% of the public approves of the job he's doing. And those numbers aren't good enough if he plans to spend more than 4 years running this country. Here's the question. Why does President Obama seem to have lost his touch? Now that he's been elected, it's evident that he will continue the same policies that this country's been on for 30 years. Increase the size of government and spending while destroying the economy and the middle class. We've heard rhetoric of huge differences between Republicans and Democrats, but never anything that would change the direction of the country. Only what would keep our focus from the reality that we really have only one political party. We're under corporate control and being guided toward a one-world government, and there won't be enough people awake in time to prevent it.
First, it's a fight over spending money we don't have as usual. House Democrats want to add $50 billion in domestic spending to a war bill for Iraq and Afghanistan. We're $6 billion a month in Afghanistan these days. That includes nearly $23 billion to prevent teacher layoffs, $5 billion for college students, $18 billion for energy projects. Some don't know what they are. It is your money, though. The Senate version of that war bill costs $60 billion without everything I just listed for. Is there anybody in America not serving in our Congress at this point who is of the belief that either party would do anything other than spend money they didn't have to try to keep their jobs and create pretend solutions as opposed to actually providing leadership to solve obvious problems that have been accumulated over decades at this point?
Well, no, and it is a transparency issue. It is an issue where we've had major bills coming along, including this one, that are being negotiated behind closed doors that have all kinds of spending that's not germane to the issue. And look, Republicans did it too, and I was opposed to it then. This is wrong. If we're going to have war spending that is outside of the regular budget, that's all it should be.
I mean, it's infinite. The exploitation of the system to maneuver money, it borders on comical. Alicia, do you feel that the recent activity in the primaries, that the anti-incumbency that we're seeing, that the willingness to rattle the cage of both the status quo on the left and the right is a positive indication we may be building toward an electorate that will demand actual change as opposed to just change as a campaign slogan?
Well, I certainly hope so.
How do you complete a recovery when the banking system is predicated on extracting money from people, not lending money to people, and when the government, Martha, is more interested in accommodating extractionary or exploitative policies as opposed to encouraging actual free enterprise and value-creating policies, as the PR of this country would have us believe, but as we know, the body of evidence is pretty contradictory to that. I don't see how we fix any of this nonsense until we fix a government that is willing to accommodate outdated businesses who are desperate to perpetuate their own profit margins at the expense of the total future of this country. We wouldn't let the horse and buggy guys take over the government to protect themselves from the car guys. We wouldn't let the whale blubber oil salesmen take over the country to protect them from electricity. But we have allowed both energy companies and financial companies to do exactly that because they're used to being rich. But until we create a system where the politician's interest is not in pretending to solve the problem to make people like you and me happy and actually is interested in actually leading us to a solution, I get very skeptical.
I feel like I need to say something about Barack Obama and Blackwater, because conventional wisdom would have it that Obama is going to aggressively go after Blackwater, going to shut these guys down, and it's like the clock is ticking for them. I wish that were the case. Unfortunately, though, Barack Obama has said publicly that he not only will not sign on to legislation which exists to ban Blackwater and to stop the use of these companies, armed contracting companies in U.S. war zones, but that he cannot and will not rule out using them himself in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. You see, the problem here is that Barack Obama does not have an actual plan to end the occupation of Iraq. His Iraq plan will downsize it and rebrand it, but will sustain a sizable presence of U.S. troops for the foreseeable future. He will keep control of the Green Zone, Baghdad International Airport, and the monstrous U.S. Embassy, which was built in part on slave labor, forced labor. And Obama has written himself into a corner where he is going to need companies like Blackwater, Triple Canopy, and DynCorp to implement his Iraq policy. He also, and I think this is incredibly disturbing, is characterizing Afghanistan as the good war, as many of the Democrats checked their spines at the door during the Democratic National Convention like it was a mink coat. and they're sort of like vegetarians between meals. They're anti-war between elections. We're going to have an escalation in Afghanistan, and it's going to get very, very bad, very, very fast. It's going to. I predict that Afghanistan is going to get worse and worse as the U.S. escalation is implemented. Obama credits himself with pushing for more troops and saying that McCain and Bush followed his lead. So we have Iraq. The occupation is not going to end. It's going to be downsized and rebranded. Afghanistan is going to escalate. Obama, unfortunately, uses the Bush administration and the Clinton administration rhetoric on the war on drugs. He talks about the war on the people of Latin America as though it actually is a war on drugs. It's a counterinsurgency war, and it always has been. Yes, there's narco-trafficking. Yes, it needs to be combated. But the U.S. is using the war on drugs to wage a counterinsurgency campaign throughout Latin America, and it's no coincidence that Blackwater is bidding for a share of a $15 billion contract to, quote, fight terrorists with drug trade ties, at a program that could find them operating in Colombia, Bolivia, as well as in Central Asia. He has been posturing aggressively toward Iran, and his statements at AIPAC about Israel-Palestine were, I just think, atrocious. Pakistan, when Obama says that he is reserving the right to use unilateral force inside of any sovereign nation's border, I think that should all be a sobering reminder of what the past 8 years have looked like under the Bush administration.
No weapon against terrorists has been as effective as America's unmanned drones. One model, the Reaper, has a 66-foot wingspan and a range of over 3,600 miles. It can carry 4 missiles and 2 laser-guided bombs on missions as high as 50,000 feet. But today, our national security correspondent David Martin reports drones drew fire from the UN.
No one will officially admit the strikes are taking place.
You've got complete silence from the CIA, by definition, because that's how the CIA operates. I understand that. But that's why they should not be operating major projects which kill people directly.
Philip Alston is the author of a new UN report which argues that drone strikes amount to a license to kill without being held accountable. A license the U.S. would not want any other country to have.
The rules we're setting for ourselves now are the rules that we're also setting for others later.
Think about it. An operation the U.S. doesn't even admit exists has killed more than 500 people.
It allows us to carry out acts of war without having to go through some of the debates that we would have in the past.
Peter Singer of the Brookings Institute has counted 137 drone attacks in the Pakistani tribal areas. U.S. officials say those attacks have killed 16 high-ranking terrorists, most recently Al-Qaeda's number 3, along with hundreds of foot soldiers and trainers. And the strikes are increasing in intensity as a new generation drone called the Reaper, which can carry twice as many weapons, comes online with even more sophisticated cameras.
If it sees footprints in a field, it can backtrack those footprints and tell you where they came from.
The strikes are secret because neither the U.S. nor Pakistan wants to admit the CIA routinely violates Pakistani sovereignty. But everybody knows who to blame.
They've also been very effective in creating a large amount of anger at the U.S. that may well bite us in the long term.
Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, told investigators the drone strikes were the reason he set out to kill hundreds of innocent Americans.
And then you look at the people that he's considering for high posts. Naomi mentioned Larry Summers, Rahm Emanuel. You can't get a more symbolic sense of where this is all going than the selection of Rahm Emanuel as the chief of staff. They are recycling all of the hawks from the Clinton era and bringing them back into the White House. Rahm Emanuel, Richard Holbrooke, Madeleine Albright, Tony Lake, Susan Rice, Hillary Clinton maybe as Secretary of State. Obama had a real chance and has a real chance to build a foreign policy team that is not like the 90s where we had this belligerent policy and the Democrats were sort of out-Republicing the Republicans. He has a real chance to do it, but unfortunately it seems as though he's bringing back the old guard. And this is what I think needs to be confronted. So in closing, I want to say that I think that in a way we've already had a coup that's taken place in this country. We live now in a corporatist society. The corporations, and we saw this very clearly in the elections and by studying the campaign financing, corporations are in total control. And I like the way that Naomi put it about the banks taking over, not the other way around. But, you know, there's that movie Usual Suspects, and Kevin Spacey has this great line at the end of it where he says, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. In many ways, the coup has already happened. And it's up to us to reveal it, to confront it. It's not about being Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative. It's about fighting for what's right in this country. The election is done. Now the fight begins. Thank you.